I have tried to keep in touch with Cyrus and Heather. Cyrus, the last I talked to him, hadn't really been sick. I mean, he tested positive, but he hasn't had any symptoms to speak of. Heather has been sick and had a hard time of it. And so we want to keep them and all the ones that we've just prayed for in our prayers. I saw one this morning that I thought was really good. It said Moses. You remember Moses? Said he was the first person with a tablet to receive data from the cloud. Oh, that was pretty good. And I'm, whether you realize it or not, I'm getting real close to, I'm about a year and a half away from being 80 years old. And that's astounding to me. But anyway, so I know a lot of old stuff and some of the new stuff, some good stuff I don't really know all that well. But I got to thinking the other day, how many of you have heard of Marshall Keeble? He was an old preacher back in the 50s, black man, and just beautiful heart, beautiful sermons. And I remember a recording of his that I heard of a sermon, and he was talking about Lazarus. This is not all the lesson about that, but he was talking about Lazarus and the fact that Jesus was so compassionate to Mary and Martha and all of the things that were going on there in that story. And you just feel kind of funny at a certain point. He talks about Jesus going over to that grave, and he says, or entombment, whatever it was, and it says he called him by name. He called him by name. If he hadn't called him by name, everybody in the cemetery would have gotten up. I like that one. Acts 21 today. There are some things in Acts 21 that are very perplexing to me. And I've studied them and studied them, and I still don't know much about them. But we're not going to talk about that part of Acts 21 this morning. And to begin with, the writer of this material says, share a funny prediction you have heard or said that didn't come to pass. He said, maybe you said you would be a millionaire by the age of maybe 30. Instead, you're just driving an old Chevrolet Colorado pickup. And that's, Sean said that. He said, that's what I drive. He said, and so that's a joke. Just laugh. Or he said another one would be like the Cowboys will win the Super Bowl this year. It's also a joke. And then he adds, in more ways than one, which I thought was kind of funny too. And then he says, maybe when you were pregnant, Sean, I was never pregnant. But anyway, maybe when you ladies were pregnant, someone said you will have a boy. And you had twin girls. I know they told my wife when she was carrying the first child, that's kind of tall. And she carried the baby low, and I don't really know what that means. At least that was our perception, and everybody said, oh, if you carry it low, it's going to be a boy. And that one came true, because we found out we couldn't have anything with boys. That's all we had. So, and he says, my personal favorite is 2020 will be the best year ever. No, it's true. The best year for being miserable, the best year for wishing it wasn't this year, it's the best year ever. Like the old saying goes, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Let's see, I was always supposed to be Chuck, but have you got one that you thought of while I'm, going on up here? And I was wishing you'd get here. Missing you big time. It feels better now that you're in your place. I didn't put you in your place, but I was trying to. Okay, that was a joke. In case anybody doesn't understand that, I would talk to
Somebody said last year in our elders meeting, I can't remember which one, one of the guys said, well, 2020 is coming, but at least we'll be able to see things a little bit more clear.
I see things more clearly. We've seen some things we didn't want to see.
Wow.
But nobody that I know of has the power of prophecy. I know once in a while we come across some people who seem to be very good at predicting, but they really don't have the power of prophecy. God's not inspiring them with the information
What's
of
that?
what is going
Nostradamus,
to happen
or
in the
is it
future.
Nostradamus, or what's his name?
Nostradamus?
Yeah, that he was always going to predict, and he always had all these ideas. So people
Yeah.
intertwine things today into what he said. Supposedly the world should have already ended. We should all be dead.
And they have to really interpret some of that stuff to get it to work.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So when you think about this, what we know and what we can know, this question comes up. And I got ahead of myself. Would you rather know how you're going to die or when you're going to die? Because you're going to.
Yeah.
We don't like to talk about it.
Yeah.
I
When?
figured out I'm getting closer to 80. I mean, it's got to be closer. Of course, you get in the car and go somewhere. Maybe today. Please don't. I love you and I want you to be around for a while. You're part of my world and I appreciate you. Have you got an opinion about that? Would you want to know one or the other? I like the third option.
Neither.
I don't want to know either one.
Yeah.
We've always wanted to see into the future, see things to come. Some people go to fortune tellers. Even on my email, I get this lady that gets on there and says, I can tell you your future and all that sort of stuff. And I keep putting her in the trash. Not the lady, the email. Putting that in the trash, and finally I'm getting this little deal where you can block it and that sort of thing. But I don't know, she comes with a different address, and here she is again. And I can tell you your future. Well, I know what she really was. She wants my money, and she can't tell my future.
Yeah.
And so, she may can guess real good and get a thing or two, but she really can't do that. But people through the years, King Saul went to a lady that evidently had some kind of spirit that she could tell the future, and it didn't turn out well, did it? There's even an opera called, and I know y'all are probably not opera fans, but called The Medium. And it's this lady that's fooling all these people that are her customers in this opera. And it's a really sad, a lot of music sometimes is sad. Well, this one's really sad. You can go watch that one, and it's just, it's got a lot of sad music, and it's kind of a little masterpiece too. It's just an hour long. It was made to be on TV. But fortune tellers and mediums, what does the Bible say about that? There's several passages in the Old Testament that says, leave them alone. Don't get involved with these people. Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 21, where that list of sins is, the list is there, where that list is, the things to stay away from, get this out of your life. You don't need it. It's sinful. It's terrible. Well, fortune telling is one of them. And so now, somebody does that and we're having fun and we're playing a game or something like that. That's one thing. But serious fortune telling, God holds the future. And Jesus said, don't worry about it. Well, now that's difficult, isn't it? Don't worry about it. He says, God will take care of it. God will take care of you. Don't worry about the future. And he says, tomorrow will have enough problems of its own, Matthew 6 and verse 34. Now, does that mean we can't make plans for the future? Or, you know, there's got to be a balance there. Of course we can make plans. It's foolish not to make plans. There were some things said about that too, about in James, about saying we'll go here, we'll go there, we'll get gain and all that sort of stuff. But what's your life? It's just a vapor that appears for a little while and then it's gone. So be thoughtful and do what you need to do, but don't get too invested in the future that's possibly not going to be there. Yes, sir.
When we're talking about James, that's if it's God's will, we have to put God in our plans. You know, don't leave him out. You know, sometimes we leave him out and think, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And we don't even say God willing because we don't know we're going to be alive the next moment or the next day. So if you're going to make plans, we'll put him first. You know.
You know, of course, my dad was a preacher, and he said it often, but I have been around a lot of people who use that expression, well, if God wills.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that shows us a humility we ought to have, and that we do live in a sphere that is ruled by God, and that He is the most important thing in it, and we want His will to be done. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot, you know, let's see, the Galbraiths called, Sister Galbraith called, she wants me to tune their piano next Thursday. And I said, well, I'm going to do that. Well, if God will. I may not be here to do that by next Thursday. I don't know.
That expression, Lord willing, or the creek don't rise.
Yeah, and that creek don't rise. Yeah, I like that. Well, today we're going to look at that prophecy that Jesus made to Paul. And we're going to look at the fulfillment of that prophecy, how it continues to unfold throughout the book of Acts. And although Paul didn't necessarily know how he would die or when he would die, he knew that some things were not going to go well after those kinds of prophecies are made. And Jesus himself makes the prophecy. It's not going to end well, at least from our earthly perspective. Now, I'm not talking about the spiritual business and all and his relationship with God. That's not the point here. But as we look at things here on the earth, it's not going to go so well. Also, need to make this point. Paul wasn't afraid of dying. That wasn't a factor in this. He seemed to be more afraid of someone that he came in contact with missing heaven. And he said something that I think is totally astounding in Romans 9 verse 3. He said, for I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh. So he loved his Jewish kin folks, and he wanted them to be saved. And to the point that he made this statement, I could wish myself accursed if that would get them into the kingdom and bring about the salvation of their souls. But let's look at Jesus' prophecy again. That we covered this originally on week 2. But the Lord said to him, Ananias, go, for he, Paul, is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel, for I will show him how much he must suffer for my sake, or for my name, depending on the translation. So Jesus told Ananias, Paul is going to suffer. But he also said that Paul is going to be a great witness, because he's going to be a witness to the Gentiles. That was kind of news, wasn't it? And to kings and to the children of Israel. So that pretty much gets everybody. Now then, I'm supposed to encourage you, but I think you've already done it, to open your Bibles, because we're just going to get little bits and pieces in our slides here. Just have parts of this chapter. But it says, while we were staying for many days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. And coming to us, he took Paul's belt and bound his own feet and hands and said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, this is how the Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him to the hands of the Gentiles." And I didn't pick up that. And when he heard this, we and the people there urged him not to go up to Jerusalem. Then Paul answered, "What are you doing? Weeping and breaking my heart, for I am ready not only to be imprisoned, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." And since he would not be persuaded, we ceased and said, "Let the will of the Lord be done." I just can't avoid this comment. That's what they should have said in the first place. Let's let the will of the Lord be done. Now, Agabus prophesied that what Jesus had already said, that Paul is going to suffer. Now, how do you relate to Paul's reaction in verse 13, where he said, "You're breaking my heart. Stop with all this weeping and all this business, because I'm ready to be in prison. It's okay. I'm even ready to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus."
I've experienced that a little bit when I go to Mexico and I invite people. They're like, "Man, what are you doing? You're crazy going to Mexico with all the violence and all this stuff." And I mean, God said He would be with us. You know, He'd be with us all the way. I mean, so what are we doing to God? We're just kind of pushing Him aside or something. And I mean, and I've been to Mexico, I don't know how many times, and never, I mean, I've seen a bunch of stuff, but I've never experienced nothing. You know, God has always been there for us and taking care of us.
Well, would it mean that God wasn't there for you if something happened to you?
No.
I knew you didn't do that.
I mean,
That's what
I've
you
always,
bring about.
always tell Josie, if I die in Mexico, at least I'm doing God's will.
Amen.
You know, wherever we're at, we need to be doing God's will. You know, but
Like what he said this morning, we have to leave our comforts and go after what God wants us to do.
Yeah, I thought this morning's lesson really fits well with the lesson that we're having now. Anybody else have a thought or Well, and the question comes, can you hear yourself saying that? Or would you say something different? And there are a lot of reasons why a person might say something different. And my not just suggestion, but my recommendation with love and concern for you is, if you don't really feel that way or feel that you could say that, fix what's wrong in your life. Do what needs to be done. And sometimes that's hard to do. Maybe you need some help. Find somebody that will help you along the way if you need that. Because there are people who love you and want to help you. Okay. When the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, this is our main reading here, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against the people and the law and this place. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him to the temple. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. And as they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. He at once took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when he saw the tribune and when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Ooh, I bet he's glad they saw him. Yeah. Then the tribune came and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. And some in the crowd were shouting one thing and some another. And as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. And when he came to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd, for the mob of the people followed, crying out, "Away with him." Why do you holler away with somebody supposed to think they're trash? God didn't make trash, and Paul sure wasn't trash, but anyway, that's the way that we're thinking right now. So what's happening to Paul in these verses?
Probably the same people that probably preached before and other ones now they want him to kill him.
Well, what was the prophecy about Paul? That he would what?
He was going to be, he was going to show him how, God was going to show him.
Yeah, he's suffering. That's exactly what he's doing. This is what Jesus said in his prophecy. This is what Agabus said in his prophecy. And it says, it has a little instruction here, and I don't know how you were going to do this, so I decided I had to do this. List all that happens to Paul in these 9 verses. Okay. Well, they laid hands on him, and that was with anger and hatred and evil intent, and they were ready to kill him. So that couldn't have been very pleasant. Essentially, they lied about him to stir up more of the crowd because, some of the crowd evidently wasn't quite at the peak of frenzy. So we got to say some things that will get everybody really stirred up at Paul. And then they accused him based on the supposition about Trophimus. Well, he probably brought him in the temple. So we'll just go ahead and make that one of the charges too. And then it says they seized him. Well, they've already laid hands on him. So I'm not exactly sure. Maybe they let go of him for a minute or something. Well, now they seized him and they dragged him out of the temple. And I never liked being dragged, and he probably didn't either. And it says they sought to kill him. So the idea they had in mind was for him to be dead when this was all over with. And it says they had been beating him. Well, you can beat somebody to death. Yeah, I don't know that they had any weapons. I'm thinking perhaps they did not. But you still beat somebody to death. You can still terrible injuries and painful stuff. And so I'm so glad that the temple, I think most of you probably already know this, was right by a fortified area there called the Antonia Fortress. And this is where the tribune was, and all those soldiers were barracked and all this business. And they come down the steps from Antonia Fortress to find out what's going on. And the tribune has him arrested, and he's bound with 2 chains. And the tribune tried to interrogate him and then ordered him to the barracks. And it was bad enough with this bunch of people that they had to carry him up the steps because his life was in danger, and the soldiers are having to protect him. And they carried him into the Antonia Fortress, and they protect him because of the violence of the crowd, and they're all hollering, "Away with him." And Sean asks you this question, and it's a lovely question. Which of these things would you rather not happen to you? Have you ever been the object of something kind of slightly similar to this? Once in a while, kids in school do go through some things that are pretty bad. And if you've ever been through some of it, you've been ridiculed and all. I've seen some things happen that never should have happened, and you just don't feel very good. You kind of end up feeling sorry for yourself. What did I do? But I don't think Paul had much time for some of that. He had a mission, and he was going to take care of it. And I'm going to get my watch out here because I do want to get to the end of this lesson today, because, and Sandy, if somebody said something to you, it wasn't me. Because you get up here, you care about the people in this class and so forth. You care about the business with giving things to people that they need and all that sort of stuff. And we love you for that. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. But a lot of the lessons that we have, they have a lot of application right all the way through the lessons. If I don't get to the end, it's no big deal. Well, this lesson's kind of different from that. It's kind of like the application of the lesson is right out there on the end. So, okay. So, well, when he says, which of these things would you like to hear said about you or not like to hear, whichever? He says, too often we say things like this. Well, that was then and this is now. Well, that's true, but it may happen now, one of these days. And there's certainly places you can go. And Sandy talked about people concerned for him in Mexico. And, you know, there are dangers any place you go. You can just go to Israel as a tourist, you can call it that, and you just tour things over and so forth. There are places that you do well not to go and to be, and there are evil people anywhere you go. But and then there's some people might even say, well, I'm not that kind of Christian, and that just doesn't make any sense to me if somebody says that about getting into a situation like this. Jesus said, Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. So a life well lived in the kingdom is going to come at a cost. We may not go through some of the trials and so forth like Paul did, but it still comes at a cost. Sean says, this week Jason Thornton shared a powerful message. If you don't know who Jason Thornton is, that's fine. I don't either. But he's at the Memorial Drive Church of Christ on the Facebook page in Memorial Drive Church of Christ in Tulsa. There are other Memorial Drive Churches of Christ. But this is in Tulsa, and I got it all looked up and so forth, and I was going to read it, and then something happened, and I didn't get to read it, and I'm still going to read it. But he said there was a powerful message there, and what he talked about was Jesus welcoming the storm to show his power is greater than the storm. Well, we don't have the power of Christ in the same sense that he had power, but we do have Christ with us and in us, if we believe our Bibles at all. And there are a lot of storms that we can go through, that we can weather with Jesus. And so now we're actually getting down to, and I've got probably 10 minutes, maybe 15, oh boy, that I can talk about this. God uses change and chaos to grow people. Do we have any changes lately? Have we had any chaos lately? If you don't think so, well, where have you been? Yeah, we've had a lot of stuff that is kind of foreign to our thinking and our thought processes, all this business. And we either become better because of it, or we become bitter. Because some things probably are not working out like you like for it to. I mean, there's just a lot of things happening in this world that are not like I want them to be. And he's got this here. Let me say something. I don't want anything to happen to keep you from loving me or me from loving you. I just don't want it to happen. So I tiptoe through this little thing that Sean's got here. But how many times did you check the news to see who won the presidency? And how many times are you checking it now to see what's going on with all this? Oh, isn't that a mess?
Yeah.
And without taking either side, because I don't want to do that in this class. That's if you want to ask me personally and we can talk about it loving you, that's fine. But I think it has no place in this class to get into a political thing here. But it has created a lot of chaos in our lives. And we don't live in one of those places where we've had people looting and burning and doing things like that, but we've seen it. And it is happening, and this should not be normalized in our country. That I think we all would agree with that and feel that way, and we're concerned about it. I don't want these things happening. I would like for something to cause that business to stop. And how many times have you thought or said, I'm so done with COVID? Well, aren't we all? Beth and I went to Edmond. We got back last night, Oklahoma, to see her mother. This is the first time in months that we've actually gotten to go inside the facility. She lives in an assisted living place, very nice one, and very nice people there. But this is the first time we actually could go in and see her. And we were at this end of the table, and she was off down yonder at the other end of the table, and we were all wearing our masks and all this business. But at least we got to see her. We didn't get to hug her, but we got to see her. And that's a big improvement over what it's been up to now. Talking to a 95-year-old woman through the window is just not worth much. And she happens to have one of the two apartments there that actually has a little yard and a fence, and we could talk to her over the fence if we didn't get caught. We made sure we had our masks on. Well, there were some people, if they caught you, if they thought you didn't have your mask on or something, they'd say something about your mask, but they wouldn't say anything. But there's one guy coming up there, you are not supposed to be here. You get out of here. So, okay. And she got fired the other day. That was pretty unchristian of me, wasn't it? I apologize. But, well, that's zero.
Times are already hard as it is, and people showing a little bit of, whatever that word is, that,
Compassion.
yeah, it helps.
Well, and the trouble with that is Beth's mom had to stand up while we visited with her, and I mean, it's just been a sad situation. Okay, well, are we going to grow? Are we going to just sit back and gripe like I've been doing? I love to do that. And I always like to think there's a little humor in it so that it's not just me being an old whiny, complaining person, because nobody needs that. But Sean makes this point that if we don't grow from this, we're dying. We may not die immediately, but that we're either, if we just stagnate, that's not a good thing. You see a little child growing up, and all of a sudden they get to a certain point, and they're no longer developing physically or mentally or this sort of thing. That's a sad thing to see. Well, it's a sad thing for you and for me if we stop growing spiritually. You need to grow. I need to grow. We need to know more next week than you knew this last week. We need to be more compassionate next week. We need to find other ways maybe than we've found, and I'm beating on myself right now because I need it, to bless people's lives, because it's difficult. when you have all this isolation and all this stay away from everybody and all of that, because when people need you, you know, I go see Cyrus and Heather. Well, that's probably not a good idea. Then I have to quarantine for 14 days and all that business. It's possible Cyrus had it when he was here last week in class. And Santi and I probably got closer to him than anybody else, but it's time we should have symptoms and we don't, so I guess he didn't give it to us, and I appreciate his not doing that. Of course, he didn't have any control over that. So, Jesus would remind us that his name is above all of this. COVID, the president, sickness, disease, all the knee is going to bow to Jesus. He is the one that is sovereign. Paul understood that. He lived and taught that Jesus is worth anything and everything that the world throws at you. It's just spend your time trying to please him, to do what he wants you to do. And the quote of the week, I think, is going to come up next. Well, actually, it's not. I'll get to that one. Well, yeah, we'll get to that. Quote of the week: great legacy emerges from great difficulty. And I thought, why did he put that word legacy there? And I did some searching. And I thought, okay, this is probably a real good statement, and I'm too dumb to understand it. So we'll work on it. Well, the legacy is what you leave behind. You know, is the world a better place because you lived? Is your family blessed because you lived, because you blessed your family and you loved your family? What is the purpose of my life so that I will leave something? Well, I know a lot of people who want to leave a lot of money to their children. Beth and I have a very different philosophy. We've told our kids, y'all are doing just fine. You don't need it. We're going to spend it. And it hasn't been difficult to do so far. And but really and truly, what improvement for the future maybe came from you? And there have been times in your life when you have talked to, I had a lady one time that complimented me, and it just floored me because I couldn't have been any more surprised. She said, you know, I like talking to you about my problems. And I thought, yeah, I know. But anyway, she said, and the reason is because you don't make excuses for me, and you try to tell me what the Bible says and what you think is right, instead of soft pedaling is, well, that's okay. She said, you don't tell me it's okay when it's not okay. And I never expected to be complimented for that. And usually people don't like it when you don't say what they want to hear you say. It's kind of like, okay, get out of my face. And but I appreciated her candor and her real concern to do what was right in her life. So I thought, well, maybe it was a little help. I hope so. I mean, what are we here for? And I remember the lady that I had in a counseling session over in Leadway, they just said, don't tell me that. Well, how can I not tell her that? It's the truth. And it's so obvious. It's right there. And I said, well, what do you want me to say? And finally, in just great tears, she walked out of my office and she never came back. And I worried about it for days and days and days. I ran into her in Walmart or somewhere about 2 years later. And she said, I'm glad to see you. And I thought, well, I would wonder. And she said, no, I want to tell you, everything you told me was true. And she said, I was so unwilling to face it. But she said, you got me started. And then she told me about her, well, everything got fixed. Everything was okay now. And all that. I thought, well, at least I didn't hurt the situation. But you don't want to you want to do that. So what are we leaving behind? What gift do we have for those coming along behind us? And going through difficulty doesn't guarantee a legacy worth remembering, but you will not have a legacy worth remembering if you don't go through any difficulty. There's no testimony, he says, without a test. No great faith without being challenged. Success in any area takes blood, sweat, and tears. Well, we know that. We just don't like to hear it. Life is an uphill battle, to coin a phrase that you've never heard before. So if you're neutral, you're going backwards, because life is uphill. Now then, we have a meditative question. What are you willing to do for Jesus? Every one of you is in a different place, in a different situation, and what you can give is so different from what others can give. You are so unique. Yeah, we don't think, I can't do that. Yes, you can. You know people nobody else in here knows anyway. And you have rapport, is that a good word? With people maybe that not much of anybody else does. Sometimes you get close to somebody and when not much of anybody else can. Okay? Don't use that rapport to try to beat them up. Figure out how you can help them. You help them enough. If they need the gospel, you can present that. You help them enough, and you can help them through all kinds of hurdles and so forth. People are amazing what they can do if somebody will just get back there behind them with the pitchfork and encourage them. That wasn't a very good illustration, but it's just one of those silly things that comes to my mind. I've seen too many cartoons in my life. I guess that's what it is. So what are you willing to do for Jesus? Some of the things that we do for Jesus, I don't think we think about it as doing something for Jesus, and we need to figure out, if we're helping somebody and we're doing good, that yes, Jesus is in our life if we're thinking about it right. And then there's this prayer idea. God, let thy faith always be greater than my fear. I don't know how much you all deal with fear. I know some people who are really afraid right now about some things. COVID, one of them. You're not so much in that situation because you're here. Most of you don't have a mask on, some of you do. The rules are, and I'm not the mask police, so don't. You're supposed to have it on in class. The teacher can take his off. But if you're not wearing it, I'm not upset at you, and I didn't say that for that reason. But the reason for saying it is to talk about fear. And it is something that we better respect. We better be thoughtful about this disease. And I really think I've already had it. I was so sick for about 4 hours. I can't begin to tell you how sick I was. But I don't know. I thought, well, if you have it for 2 weeks. But we've been talking with some doctors and so forth, and I know a doctor that had the swine flu for 6 hours, and he knew what to do to get rid of it. And it's pretty much the same thing with any virus. And I shared it with Cyrus and Heather, I think, has helped. So not Dr. Gary, but Dr. somebody else that knew some stuff there. But I don't want to equate the idea of being respectful of a disease, maybe with, that can be a fear factor, but I'm not making fun of anybody's concern about that disease. That's not really the fear that I'm talking about. Are you afraid to talk about Jesus? Are you afraid to bring him up? Don't be. Let me encourage you. let me get you a pitchfork. Let me say, you will be, you have no idea how many times you will be appreciated. And yeah, there'll be somebody that'll say, I'm not interested, they want to talk about that. But you're gonna have some others that are gonna say, well, since you brought that up,
The world will tell you how they feel, and they will not hesitate.
that's right.
Yeah.
You know, they won't, this is the way I believe, or I don't believe in God, and blah, 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 and I mean, it's straightforward. So we just have to be able to stand up for God too, and let people know, in a loving way,
Absolutely.
this is how we believe.
Yeah, if you poke fun at people or deride them, this sort of thing, you're not going to get very far. Or put downs. And some of us have inadvertently, because we didn't know what we were doing, done those put downs. I remember a preacher who used to say, tell something and it's very plain. Well, it's very plain to some of us. It wasn't that plain to some other people because they've been taught something else all their life. And it didn't help when he said, anybody that can see through a ladder can see that. It just could help, don't say things like that. Because that person's thinking, I'm having trouble seeing this, and now you're calling me stupid because I can't see through a ladder. We need to be thoughtful about that. And I for several years, I've tried not to do that, but there was a while there that I didn't have any better sense.
As a nurse practitioner, you are taught not to bring your own ideals into the room. It's so weird to me because nursing is a caring and loving thing to do. How can you not acknowledge God in that time? And but the older I got, the better I'm like, I don't care about that mess. And I'm telling you, it's more of an emotional game when people are sick and ailing and not feeling good, more so than sometimes their physical problems that they bring to that table, to that meeting at that time. So if you don't address it, it's like not addressing the elephant in the room.
Yes.
And that's the same way of teaching. You're doing it because you care, and then kids will say or do something, you're like, oh, how can I not get fired and have a discussion with these? Yeah. Yeah.
We need to be able to do
that, and you can't, yeah.
Well, when I taught school, I got a lot of questions because they knew I had, or actually, while I was teaching school, I was preaching at that point in time. And kids would just go and say, you're a preacher, aren't you? Yeah. Well, what do you think about this? And I just tell them, I will tell you what I think, but you understand that I'm telling you what I think, and you asked. Don't go home and tell your mama that I said you have to believe this. I'm not saying that. I'm telling you what I believe. So you can consider it and think about it. And I had a lot of really good discussions with some of those kids. And something that I learned about the little black kids is nearly every single one of them went to church. And if they were just really acting outlandishly, I could just look at them and say, I don't think your preacher would be too happy with you right there. And all of a sudden they just kind of pull in like, oh, I can't believe you said that. Because you're right.
Yeah.
And most part they were just sweet kids. I didn't have any really bad kids. Well, folks, I hope you have a wonderful, marvelous, tremendous week.
Thank you.
And I know God's going to bless you and love you. He always does.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's something I can do that would be of any help to you, well, please let me know. Because I'd love to be of help. That's what I'm here for.
Thank you.